name's Tanner. I'm the Plant Propagation Manager here at United Plant Savers, and today we're talking about planting American ginseng. That's a Panax quinquefolius. Today we're going to demonstrate how to plant ginseng seeds using the wild simulated method. The wild simulated method is a good way to establish any size planting, but it's really a quick and easy way to establish larger areas as well. Ginseng has been harvested for hundreds of years here in Eastern North America. It's had a large impact on the wild populations, and it's definitely one of our most at-risk species. So having a sustainable supply and growing your own roots is a great thing to do. Before we get started, we're going to talk a little bit about American ginseng's life cycle and how the plants grow and develop. We'll talk about some of the elements that make a good planting site so you can hone in on the best areas to plant your seeds. We'll do some demonstrations of some basic site preparation activities that you'll want to do before you go ahead and plant. Then we'll go ahead and plant seeds, do that, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about some of the long-term maintenance issues like pests and diseases that you might run into. Ginseng is a long-lived perennial species. It can live for 20 or 30 years. It takes several years before it reaches maturity and before the root's ready to harvest. Generally the first 2 years the plants remain in a seedling state where they only have 3 tiny leaflets, and generally continue through an annual progression of development where they add on an additional leaf each year. In the ginseng world, the leaf, which has 5 leaflets and is palmately shaped, is referred to as a prong. So that's common terminology that you'll hear in ginseng cultivation. So once plants progress through their 1-prong, 2-prong, and then finally reach a 3-prong stage of development where they have 3 sets of mature leaves, they become reproductively mature. Generally this is about 5 or 6 years. And they can eventually develop a 4th leaf as well, become a 4-prong plant. But it's important to note that these stages are not really linear or permanent. The plants can respond to their environment or disturbance conditions and come up as a younger or lesser developed stage the following year. So for example, a 3-prong plant, if it gets browsed by a deer, could come up as a 2-prong plant the following year. So it's important to note that things can bounce around, and the number of leaves that a plant has is not a great determination of a plant's age. Site selection is a really important process. Selecting a good site helps get you started off on the right foot and can help you avoid problems down the road. Most of our best ginseng sites are located on north or east-facing hillsides. This is the shady side of the hill that receives the least amount of direct sun. Ginseng is a shade-loving plant. It needs a deep shade to really thrive and survive. Typically, most of our best growing sites have about 75% shade. The wild simulated method really relies on a good natural growing site. So here in this site, we're going to get that 70% shade from the forest canopy. But if you're growing ginseng in a more garden or landscape or intensively cultivated type situation, you can provide that shade with shade cloth or shade trees or other shading vegetation. Most commonly on our ginseng sites, we have a set of companion species that we're looking for. So within those north and east facing aspects, when you get onto a site, you start looking at the trees and the other plant herbs that are already growing on the site. For ginseng, we want to find sugar maple, tulip poplar, basswood, black cherry, black walnut, shagbark hickory. There's a lot of species that indicate a good site, and they usually grow together in a plant community. Another important aspect of ginseng cultivation sites is the topography and the lay of the land. So here you can see we're on a pretty moderately to steeply sloped site. This is going to help ensure that there's good drainage of moisture when we have heavy rain events, and it's going to make sure that the soils don't hold water and stay saturated for too long. Excess water in a growing site is generally a big problem for ginseng. It contributes to a lot of disease development and the spread of fungal pathogens. So It's good to have a nice slope to facilitate that drainage. If you're in an area that has less topographic variation and is more of a flat area, that is fine as long as the soils are well drained and they don't hold water. Once you've identified your planting site, there's a few preparation activities that you should do before you plant your seeds. Basically, you're going to go through the site and pick up the large sticks and debris on the forest floor that are going to interfere with your planting tools. You're going to want to prune back low hanging limbs. Generally, you can use a small saw or hand pruners, anything that's going to be hanging down in your working area or creating excess shade. You know, it's important to take a light touch. It's better to have to come in and maybe prune more later on than take out too much vegetation in the beginning. You definitely want to be sure to leave a lot of the native vegetation that's growing on the site in place, so you have a diverse community after you're done planting. Now we've got our site prepped and we're ready to start planting our seeds. So the first thing we're going to want to do is use our leaf rake to pull the leaves down off of our planting strip. Generally, if you make a strip about 4 or 5 feet wide, you can make them as long as your site will allow. Just rake the leaf litter downhill and clear off that strip. Now that we've got our planting strip cleared off here and free of leaves, we're going to use our hard steel rake here, our stiff-tined rake, to scuff the surface of the soil, just to loosen that top 1/8 of a 1/4 inch to help improve seed to soil contact. It's best to do this if you're working on a sloped site. I find it easier to work from the top side of the bed, but obviously if your site is flat, it's not going to make a difference. But this seems to be the easiest for sloped sites. So it's just a quick scuff. All right, now that we've got our soil all scuffed up and ready to plant, it's time to lay down our seeds. So as we mentioned before, ginseng seeds are planted at a ratio of about 5 seeds per square foot. That takes a little time to get comfortable with and get a good feel for what 5 seeds is. But the beauty of the rake and scatter method that we're using here is it doesn't require you to bend down and place 5 seeds there individually. So one trick that we're going to use here today is we've divided our seed into a 2-ounce bag, and then we've made our bed approximately 200 square feet. And 2 ounces of seed will plant 200 square feet just about perfectly. So that takes some of the guesswork out of the seeding ratio and helps you ensure that you get even coverage. I like to seed my beds from the top down when I'm working on a sloped site that allows gravity to help the seeds kind of roll downhill and disperse evenly through the bed. But really it's just kind of starting getting a little sprinkle. And I'm going to go down the bed and just try and get even coverage with this full 2 ounces of seed here. And then I should be at approximately 5 seeds per square foot. It's better to go a little light at first, and if you have extra seed when you get to the end of the bed, you can go back over and sprinkle some down. So that'll help guarantee that you're not overseeding any one area. This seeding ratio accounts for the natural mortality of the plants over their life. So generally, when we put down about 5 seeds per square foot, 10 years, 9 or 10 years, we'll probably expect only 1 or 2 plants per square foot. That's about the density that wild ginseng plants grow at, and that's what we want to achieve. So now we've got our strip here fully seeded, and we're ready to move on to our next bed. So we're going to rake the leaves down off our next 4-foot wide strip to cover the area that we just planted. That's why it's really important to try and maintain equal bed widths each time, so you get proper leaf coverage and proper mulch on your seeds. So the trick is just really rake it down to the lay of the bed and kind of give it a flick. Ideally, you're planting early enough in the fall so there's additional leaves that are still going to fall and help cover some of your bare spots. So it's not a perfect coverage, but we want to be as thorough as possible. And now that the leaves are on the bed, the last thing to do is to walk across the surface of your planted area. That's going to help ensure that the seeds get a little good pressing into the soil and have a better seed to soil contact, and that'll help improve germination next spring. So the wild simulated method, as we just demonstrated, is a good way to quickly plant a large quantity of seeds. If you don't have a large quantity of seeds, you can plant the seeds individually. Or if you don't have a large area to plant, maybe it makes more sense to plant your seeds individually, say in a garden setting or landscape setting. So simply just take the seed, make a hole about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deep, plant the seed in the hole, cover it up, make sure there's a good covering of leaf mulch on top, and it will germinate all the same. Depending on how much you had to prepare your planting site, if you had to remove a lot of vegetation, you're likely going to have to come back in and re-prune some of that vegetation back as it regrows over subsequent years. Sometimes you might find disease issues start to pop up in really wet years. Typically these are limited to leaf blights, but it's good to be aware of what those look like. Take a look at some outside resources on what those diseases look like so you're aware and you can identify problems before they start. As far as pests go, deer are by far probably the biggest problem for woodland growers. They browse the foliage at a pretty high rate, and that's going to vary depending on where you're at and what your local deer populations are like. Moles and voles can also be pretty significant problems for both woodland and more garden style growers. They can get in, eat the roots, and really set back a lot of growth or entirely kill a plant completely. We talked a little bit about ginseng's life cycle and ecology, some of the benchmarks that we're going to be looking for over the next couple years as our plants grow and develop. We talked about site selection. Some of the attributes are that we need to look for when we're selecting our planting sites. We demonstrated some basic site preparation, pre-planting activities. We planted our seeds using the rake and scatter method. And then we talked a little bit about some of the long-term maintenance issues and some of the pest and disease problems that we're going to be on the lookout for over the next few years.